never, ever heard anything about Spider Baby from 1967, similar to Carnival of Souls. It is a very low budget horror comedy film, kind of black horror, black comedy. I'll talk about the genre in a second. Film from the 60s that is black and white despite it coming out, in the late 60s, well after colorization. And I was not a fan of Carnival of Souls really at all. I can understand why some people would admire its artistic atmosphere and stuff like that, and its significance in retrospect and its influence in that. But I'm sorry, I didn't enjoy it personally. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. However, with this movie, it has Lon Chaney Jr. I love the cast. The cast of this movie is awesome. I love Lon Chaney Jr. He plays, the Wolfman, obviously. That was his famous role. And there are some kind of subtle nods to the Wolfman in this movie. But also we got Sid Haig, from countless Rob Zombie movies and just in general. It seems like Sid Haig is in dozens of just random horror B movies from clearly the 60s all the way up into the 2010s. May he rest in peace. He passed away about a year and a half ago, I think. Awesome guy, and his character in this movie is fucking just wild. But the premise, it kind of reminds me a little bit of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, honestly. And I feel like perhaps Tobe Hooper saw this movie and maybe extracted some sort of influence. Because, basically it revolves around this man, this caretaker, Lon Chaney Jr. Fantastic performance, by the way. And he is tasked with watching over these three children who are heirs to this very rich, wealthy, family home, I guess, or estate. And their father's dead, and their chauffeur, Lon Chaney Jr., is the one that is in charge of them, and they suffer from this disorder called the Mary's disease, I believe it was called, where essentially what happens is their brain just kind of devolves instead of evolves over time. And so socially, mentally, and even physically, they just kind of deteriorate over time. Think of it kind of like Benjamin Button's disease. But that makes for the three characters to, all have their interesting, subtle little quirks. Sid Haig, in my opinion, is the one that stands out the most. There's two females, and then there's the male, which is Sid Haig. He's bald. He looks like Eneli Chapa. I remember when I first saw him, I was like, oh my God, is that Sid Haig? I looked at the fucking Wikipedia page and saw that he was in the cast, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he plays this fucking deranged, he can't even talk. He's a fucking savage, literally, and he's crazy. He rapes a bitch in this movie. He's just nuts. And then you have the two other characters who, I'm not exactly sure how old they are. I want to say they're in their late teens, maybe. They're said to be minors, but I don't know. They look like they could be a little bit older, but once again, they do have this disorder, so it's really kind of impossible to know what the fuck is up. But one of them, I believe her name is Virginia. She is the Spider Baby. She is obsessed with spiders, and that's her thing. She likes to eat bugs. She likes to dissect things, and her tick, I guess, from her syndrome is she likes to tie people up and fucking kill them. And the entire family is all fucked up, right? And that's where it kind of reminds me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre too, especially because the family is pretty fucking crazy, but they're kind of likable, right? And that's, it's weird because Lon Chaney Jr. is you know, he's kind of roped in as their father figure, and he really loves them and he really cares for them, and he's willing to sacrifice his decency and his morals in order to keep their father, who passed away, to keep his word that he would take care of them, and so on and so forth. And you know, the third child, they're more of like the brains behind the operation. I believe it was Mary, Virginia, and Ralph. And so on top of the three kids, there's also like the father. You see his corpse. They have him in like the basement, and then there's like the uncle and the aunt, the great uncle and the aunt that are like mummified, like super decayed, fucked up individuals. Like this syndrome whacks up the entire family, right? And they're all inbred. So needless to say, they're a fucked up unit of crazy motherfuckers who kill people. I mean, the body count is, I want to say there's three kills, right? At the very beginning, they killed the messenger. May he rest in peace. They also kill Schlocker, where the fuck his name is. The, what is he called? He would be the lawyer of the greedy aunt or greedy cousin who wants to take the estate. And so ultimately you kind of have that dynamic of a good force trying to fight a bad force, but the good force is not a good look, if you get what I mean. Like, you're rooting for the bad force even though they kill people. You're not rooting for the good force because they're greedy, they're mean, we don't like them, they're not part of like the main cast of characters in which you see the perspective of. So it's kind of flipped in that circumstance, because personally I was rooting for, and I was more attached to the three characters and Lon Chaney Jr.'s character, the three siblings rather. And so I think that's kind of what makes this interesting, because, you know, when looking at this movie, and I read into a little bit of the backstory, it's incredibly low budget. It was shot in 1964, and it wasn't released until 1967, or 68 actually, so it was panned for a while as far as the production kind of stalled. And it's just a very bizarre, odd, I feel like this is probably, I mean, it was really obscure when it came out. It got very little attention at all, and I've never ever heard of it before. But I gotta say, it was kind of it's a neat little film. I guess it definitely reminds me a lot, as I said, of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and also just kind of that idea of that, you know, deranged, crazy family with a carekeeper who is, you know, normal in a way, but at the same time is willing to sacrifice his morals and keep up the craziness behind those he loves, kind of like the cook from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if that makes any sense. But I mean, I thought this movie was pretty enjoyable. I did. It's not really much of a chiller, nor do I really think it's a laugh out loud comedy, but you know, it's just kind of a decent movie, you know? And I mean, there wasn't much violence that occurred, but you know, I feel like criticizing a horror movie for the lack thereof violence is not necessarily something that you should always do. But you know, whenever they do kill, it's kind of wacky, a little absurd. They just, the girls just run after them with knives, and I like that little bit where Lon Chaney Jr. tells the children, you know, that they did good for hurting the lawyer who was a bad man who was trying to unearth their secrets, but, you know, more bad men are going to keep coming, and you can't keep hurting them because more are just going to keep showing up, right? And it's implying that if you kill the lawyer, police guy's going to show up. You kill the police guy, more police guys are going to show up. So he realizes that he's in trouble, and then you know, at the end of the movie, obviously, the ending, it gets kind of weird. It really gets kind of crazy, and it psyched me out a little bit. I had to go back and look at things again, because you had like the motherfuckers from the bottom, like the and the uncle, just kind of come out of nowhere, then you had the lawyer's like mistress or whatever come out and like start going crazy, and like it just, everything gets nuts. And at the same time, Lon Chaney Jr. says, you know what, fuck this, I'm screwed, we're all screwed. He grabs some fucking dynamite, blows the entire house up, which is pretty cool, because it was turning into a shit show. It really was. And I think it was kind of fitting that that just happened. And so you get that little prologue and epilogue, actually, of the male cousin who survived and who inherited the entire estate because he was the only one that survived, with the with his wife, who was the lawyer's mistress or assistant. So those two survived, and he pretty much kind of gives like a kind of a psycho style rundown of the syndrome and kind of like what it's about, like at the beginning and then kind of at the end, talking about how, you know, that was the last line of inbreeding, therefore the disease is gone, nobody else has a disorder anymore. And then of course we learn that his daughter, it cuts to his daughter, who he had with the, I think her name was Anne, who was the lawyer's assistant. God, my brain is just off. I just finished watching it 10 minutes ago. She ends up being infatuated with spiders, i.e. Virginia, one of the disorder-bound children. But yeah, no, I thought this movie was fun. It didn't wow me, and I had no idea what the fuck to expect coming in, and honestly, I kind of came out with a fun little movie. I'm trying to anticipate. I'm gonna read some reviews and see what others think after I get my thoughts out here. But you know, I don't know if I'd recommend it to a horror fan, because, you know, most horror fans are movie fans, and most horror fans might be like, all right, what is there that is horror to be found? And there's not much, but I definitely think it's an interesting watch. I would recommend it to a friend, and I think I would recommend it to a film fan as well, because I think it's a nice hour and 25 minute long, entertaining, fun little old, obscure 1960s black and white horror experience. I'm gonna go with a 3 out of 5. I was between 2.5 or 3. But I would say 2.5 is kind of indifference, and I did like this movie a little bit, if at least for seeing Sid Haig, a young Sid Haig, acting just absolutely fucking bananas. But yeah, it was a pretty enjoyable, unexpected, kind of bizarre movie that I think I would actually watch again at some point. 3 out of 5.